Welcome back. Over the last few weeks, there have been several incidents in Joburg in which city power officials have been chased away by residents in homes and flats when they tried to disconnect properties which have been connected to the grid illegally. At the same time, though, many people simply can't afford to pay for electricity, which means they have to use alternatives like paraffin stoves. It also means that people are using more dangerous methods to cook or to stay warm. They're spending all the money they have on food because energy is simply too expensive. Thapelo Mohapi is the General Secretary of Abahlali, baseMjondolo, the shack dwellers movement. Thapelo, good day to you. How difficult is it for people to stay warm or to cook in shacks and dwellings when they can't afford to pay for electricity?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Good afternoon to the viewers. It's very difficult, particularly for those who are marginalized people living in shack settlements. We connect ourselves to the grid unlawfully because there's no other ways. Electricity has become so essential these days that a lot of people cannot live without it. And people, particularly in winter season, they resort to making fires, and sometimes these fires are forgotten and results in shack fires where people die as a result of that. So it is a difficult moment. Electricity is very expensive. People cannot afford it. It's too much for people having to decide on whether to pay for electricity or buy food on a daily basis that they are facing. And it's also difficult to buy food when you are, on a daily basis because you don't have a fridge as a result of the energy not being available in that particular community.
It must be very difficult. It also means that people can't cook. I mean, electricity is so expensive. To cook potato, which might take an hour, for example, or boil a potato, whatever you want to do, takes a very long time. So, I mean, what do people do then? You try and use a paraffin stove if you can afford one.
Yes, people resort to making fires. People, outside so that they could cook. People resort to thin stoves, which are also very dangerous because once you leave them unattended, they tend to burn the shacks. So it's very expensive. Paraffin on its own is very expensive for people to keep it warm. The price of paraffin always increases when the price of fuel increases. So people are struggling in the informal settlements and having to resort to other ways of connecting themselves. And they end up sometimes connecting themselves unlawfully to the grid, which is not true.
And Thapelo, it's also dangerous to connect
electric fuel.
Right, we're losing you a little, but it's also dangerous to connect yourself to the grid illegally. I mean, we've seen reports that during the flooding in Cape Town, in fact, several people lost their lives because of illegal connections, as they got wet. So, I mean, that's dangerous too. People are doing this because they're quite desperate.
Yes, of course, Stephen. Out of desperation, we've had children losing their lives as a result of wires that have been, unlawfully connected, and people having young children that are playing on somewhere in the ground and having to touch this, and they're electrified and they die. We've had people that have been electrocuted in the informal settlements because these are made out of congregated iron, and sometimes the congregated iron is next to a wire that is not, properly attended, and people die as a result of that. That a lot of people, and sometimes you have these connections that are not done properly, causing the fire, and you find that about 60 shacks are burnt down in the middle of the night when people are sleeping, and some people lose their lives as a result. So it is a very dangerous. People resort to this because energy has become costly for people in the informal settlements to such an extent that they cannot afford it, which is why we are saying that people should resort to other means of creating their own, energy in the form of the recent one that we've introduced in the movement, which we call the energy democracy, where people can actually make their own electricity, make their own power that is not reliant from the state, power that is provided by the people for themselves.
You're doing this in a cooperative way. It's quite expensive to do in some places. I've seen some suggestions that, in fact, if it's done properly, you may even be able to join the grid and provide power to the grid, depending on how things are done. Are you having a lot of progress with those initiatives?
Yes. In fact, we think this is the solution. One of the things that the government has made a mistake by is to actually not include the poor and marginalized in the just transition projects, because we are wanting to bring everyone on board, which is why in one of the We have a community incubator with 10 solar power panels. They have a library. Now they have the Wi-Fi. I mean, something of that nature cost about 300,000 rand, which the people in the community cannot be able to afford. But this is an example that we have worked with some of the NGO, like your groundwork based in KwaZulu-Natal. We are saying that this is an example where community can use a particular station whenever there is no electricity in that community, but they can watch TV, they can boil their water, there is a fridge there, people working together socially in a communal environment to actually, supply their own source of energy. But also to educate people about the just in transition. We can't be transitioning when some people are left behind. And we are saying that as the poor and marginalized people in the informal settlement, we must also be involved in the just transition so that we also benefit out of it. You can't leave the most affected, vulnerable people like in the rural areas and in the informal settlements who are paying a lot in as far as energy is concerned, who will continue to suffer when the just transition is happening. So we are saying that this is an example that we've had. It's working at a small scale, and we want government to come on board so that we can enlarge it to other communities as well.
Thapelo Mohapi, thank you. General Secretary of Abahlali, baseMjondolo.